Hey, greetings, leaders, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Is Podcast, Season 3, Episode 24, Quiet Quitting versus Quiet Firing. Toxic cultures are produced by unaddressed issues that continue to grow and fester into a toxic disease of gossip, backbiting, lack of productivity, lack of engagement, and quitting. However, when all of that is going on within an organization, but the individuals have not quit yet, or the organizational leaders see this happening and have not fired them outright yet, what is this doing to your culture? Let's talk about it. Hey, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Is Podcast, Season 3, Episode 24. Quiet quitting versus quiet firing. Now, we have had the conversation twice as it relates to quiet quitting, why employees quit, and then we talked about quiet quitting, leadership's response to quiet quitting. But today we want to talk about, quiet quitting versus quiet firing. Quiet quitting, of course, is when an individual, as Les Brown has said this way back in the day, that, the employee is doing just enough work to not get fired, and the employer is paying them just enough for them not to quit. But that's a bad relationship. That's somewhat like a toxic relationship. There's lack of engagement on behalf of the employee to really put their full effort into the job, the requirements, the expectations, right? And to be driven by the mission statement, the core values of that organization. And so, they start doing things, and you can find this in their attendance. You can find this quiet quitting in their conversations. And of course, you can find this in their work output. However, what are the signs that, this employee is actually in the process of, being quietly fired, right? Where quiet firing is happening. Well, quiet firing is when you just don't outright fire the employee. You begin to pull certain responsibilities from them. You begin to exclude them from certain invitations to be a part of X, Y, and Z, this and that they ordinarily were a part of, as it relates to meetings, planning, committees, and etc. And so quiet quitting and quiet firing is both the result of a toxic relationship. Toxic relationships are formed, in organizations when there is a lack of presence, or there's a lack of executive presence on behalf of the leaders who are in charge of making sure that the organization is ran, the organization is going in the direction in which it is designed to go into, right? Not just products and services, but of course, the core values, mission statements, KPI, and the overall culture of the organization. So one of the things that drives, here's the two motivators that drives employees to quietly quit. And we've talked about this before in previous episodes. It's two things. It's fear and it's love, right? It's love and it's fear that drives these employees to quietly quit. Well, why haven't they just outright quit? Well, because they have responsibilities. They have obligations, right? And people are looking for them or depending on them. And so that's where the love comes in. Also where the fear comes in, the fear of disappointment of those loved ones, but also the love comes in of those loved ones, right? So I love you enough to continue to come into this toxic place and work to make sure that I can provide for my family, or I could, be an addition to the financial income of my family. And so, but the quiet firing is looking at, okay, they're just waiting for this employee to make the wrong move where they legally and through HR could fire them without any backlash, without any, it looking personal on behalf of the employee. So, quiet firing versus quiet firing versus quiet quitting. Of course, that cycle that's within that organization, that toxic relationship between the employee and the employer, is adding to the toxicity of the culture. It's like, as we've talked about before, you have a fish tank, and the fish tank is dirty. There is, all types of mildew, residue, even other dead fish, right? And feces all around inside of this fish tank. And then you're continuously adding new fish or new employees into this dirty fish tank. And then eventually these fish also become toxic and dirty and take on the characteristics of the environment, the unhealthy environment in which they are in. And so what has to happen is that the fish tank has to be cleaned out completely, even certain components that are in the fish tank that filter out the toxicity in the fish tank. Certain residue that has grown now, ingrained inside of some of the stones, some of the plastic plants, right? Even the diseases that may have been created inside of the filtration system of this fish tank now all have to be either thoroughly cleaned or completely replaced, right? So that's the way leaders have to look at the organization in which they're a part of, all of the moving parts, right? There's some toxicity that's there that leaks out, that spreads all over the organization, which then covers all of the participants, the employees, the stakeholders, the volunteers, all in this toxic soot, right? That's called a toxic culture. And so to remove dirty fish from the dirty fish tank does not solve the problem. That just removes the dirty fish. You go out and clean up the fish, or even bring in a new fish still in a dirty tank. Eventually, you're going to have another sick fish. So organizations, leaders must be intentional as it relates to the culture of their organization. Right now, so many organizations just need employees that they're willing to bring in anyone, right? They're almost willing. It doesn't mean that the one that they bring in does not add value or cannot add value. But at the same time, though, the risk that they're taking is they're bringing in someone without thoroughly vetting them or filtering them, through the KPIs and the core values and the mission statement of the organization. You can bring in someone who could add even more toxicity to an already toxic culture, an already toxic organization. So many companies are thinking they don't have time to be intentional about the promotions, about the hiring process. They just need to fill these positions because it is absolutely disturbing the distribution chains, the supply chains, right? That is in America and globally, right? So this thing has not just impacted America, but it's impacting the globe as it relates to supply chain, as it relates to workforce development, employee engagement. So quiet quitting versus quiet firing. What's really worse, though, is the quiet firing. Why is the quiet firing worse than quiet quitting? Well, the employers, it shows that they do not have certain components in place, right, to really save the employee or really change the company culture, because that has to happen from the top. I did an interview with Roberta Matheson, and she's written a book, Suddenly in Charge, and she talks about this in her book, that, you cannot change the culture without having authority and insight on how to do so. Of course, you as an individual can be an